consider this a while back? Like what?
No, we are actually live, I believe, unless I fucked up, which is completely within the realm of plausibility.
I think
Everything works too well right now.
Type of cases people do.
Yeah. All right, so this one. _case support for System.Text.Json.
So basically, for our naming policy, we have a default casing, which is Pascal casing, and we also have a built-in case for camel case, built-in support for camel case. And a lot of people, especially when they're looking at JavaScript and other places, they prefer snake case. And it's a fairly straightforward API addition here, which is let's just add a snake case built-in support as well. People have asked for it in the past, and we just like, okay, we'll just stick with camel and Pascal for now, and then once we have 5.0 open again, we'll work on this feature. So that's what they proposed, and committee members are eager to implement it, which is why I wanted to get it reviewed now to avoid unblock them. Yeah, and I actually looked at other endpoints like Facebook's and Twitter and other endpoints. They all use snake casing, so it's quite valuable and common enough for us to add it built in.
So is the heuristic when you transition from a lowercase to an uppercase to add the underscore?
It's the same heuristic that we have for camel casing. But yeah, exactly.
Well, but camel casing, you only have to change the first letter. Snake casing, you have to insert. The snake case is a lot more complicated transition than Pascal case.
Yeah, so the suggestion in the implementation detail was effectively following the UnderScoreJSon's paradigm, which is iPhone is I_phone, and then he has like words. I think there's a.
I mean, because there's just the saying that you do it when you go from lower to upper is fine and works well for English, but then upper to upper, like when do you do it from upper to upper? Always, never, after 2, after 3.
Yeah, so we also have the complex uppercasing for initials like ID and URL, so it would follow the same pattern.
I mean, like, that's all implemented.
Yeah.
The question that I'm really asking is, do we think that we can add this and we can have an answer, and that when we, like, because whatever answer we ship with in the first release it ships with, it's that until the end of time.
Sure. I mean, the easy
you can't ever change the formula.
The easy solution is do what UnderScoreJSon does. And I think that's what we do for camel casing as well, already. He was on the call, he can confirm, but yeah, that's what we do for camel casing. So the edge cases, you think you have an answer, and that answer agrees with UnderScoreJSon. That's the right approach. I mean, we took that compatibility bet.
Levi, Tarek, is there anything outside ASCII that has a notion of capital and lowercase letters that we need to include in the test suite?
Yeah. Title case?
Oh yeah, the math face, like if you name a property like hello, then math face capital W world.
Greek sigma.
Yeah. Okay. So this one will be the devil's in the details, and
yeah, for sure.
But the API is.
Oh, I'm maybe going to break that. So something to keep in mind that Tarek just reminded me of is 2 upper and 2 lower are not consistent between versions of the framework. So just keep that in mind.
When you say framework, you mean .NET Core or
.NET Core as well, and .NET Full Framework.
It depends on the OS that you're running on.
But frankly, I think
it's not even version of .NET, right? It's I run .NET 3.0 on 1604 versus 1804.
Yeah.
I get different casing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, but the when you ask the question, char dot is upper.
That answer will never change.
Will never what?
That answer will never change. The is upper.
We carry the information.
We carry the information.
Yeah. The transition map is OS dependent. The
Yeah.
is this an uppercase letter is defined by the Unicode.
Yeah.
We carry all that data in .NET.
It's carried in the operating system for the most part, but it's defined by the Unicode standard, like Jeremy said, as never changing ever under any circumstance. The only way you could ever get into a situation is if you use undefined characters in your property names, but please don't do that.
I was ignoring that.
So certainly, like, yeah, Jeremy, your point is valid, which is whenever we do implement it, let's make sure we have all sorts of edge cases, not just ASCII, but non-ASCII as well.
Yeah. So like I said, from the API, it looks reasonable, I mean, I know that snake case is used colloquially. If anybody else calls it, that seems good.
Yeah, exactly.
If that name is discoverable to the people who want to question.
Yeah.
And then the meta thing of, because we're adding this public surface area, this is now a thing that someone's going to depend on, so now compatibility.
And I assume the other ones are also not public, right? The other ones are also all internal, right?
Yeah, so there is expose the static properties.
But there are no public type that you can derive from or anything like that, right? Like they are all...
No, just the naming policy is one.
Yeah, it's
That's
only the
public.
policy, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Do we have any other popular casing?
Yeah, I was gonna ask. Like
I
when
mean,
you
there's-
checked in Facebook and Mutantsoft.json, do they have like any other? That
I believe this is it. There's kebab case, and then there's others. But again, there's no reason for us to preemptively add them. If someone there's a request for in this master pushback, we could just incrementally add them, just like how we're doing it here.
And we don't have a public Pascal case because it's the
Yes.
Well, the default is match case. We assume that your type is.
Yeah,
already-
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Which seems reasonable.
Why we
Right.
put it before not Pascal casing?
Well, it's internal.
Oh, this is
Let me just verify that.
this obviously only affects mappings to properties, correct? Like
Yeah.
if I'm reading a payload into like just a regular JSON dictionary, for instance, this isn't reversible because I assume convert name is clearly one way.
I don't know what it does if you have a naming policy and it doesn't find a property, but it shows it in the dictionary. But the serializer already has a story for that in this one.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a good answer.
Since it only has a convert name, and I assume it's from the .NET name to the wire name. Presumably that means anything that didn't have the forward mapping to that name, it just as is. So, I don't know, there was this word here, and you get to deal with it now.
So, I mean, the serializer options has two concepts. One is for properties, where you can use the naming policy, and the other is for dictionary key, which you can also use a naming policy for. So you can set both a dictionary key policy and property name policy.
Where do you configure this on JSON.NET?
JSON serializer options. Oh, you on JSON.NET?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't think I can't find anything that he has that is configurable. But maybe I'm just looking at the wrong stuff.
No, he has snake case naming strategy. So naming strategy is what you use, and you can pass in a naming strategy as a contract resolver.
But does he have any built-in ones?
Yeah, snake case naming strategy.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. I see.
Once you add the ability to go to derived types from
Yeah, I can't do that, unfortunately. He only has camel kids and snake kids as
Yeah.
well, right? Yeah.
Oh, is that true? Okay.
Yeah, I can't find anything with kebab. I mean, if you really do that, then you have to write the 5 lines of code.
Yeah, exactly.
Or 30 lines of code, or whatever you want to do it.
Yeah, so JSON.NET has default, camel, and snake.
Yep. Any more feedback? Otherwise, I'll just take it.
So are you going to be doing this work then? Asa?
No, that's why I was saying that it's a community member who's there's two of them who are eager to do it. One of them already has like tests and implementations, and again they really basically took what JSON.NET does. I have to be honest.
So they should also, whoever does the work should also add tests for surrogate pairs, because I'm looking at the code for JSON camel case naming policy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't handle them correctly.
Can you mark it also as up for grabs?
Yep.
Yeah, so just making sure that there are a lot of good test cases, invalid things of unmapped surrogates,
Right.
validly mapped surrogate pairs that hit a transition, numbers, weird cases, non-ASCII case transition. And there's a lot of stuff here, and whatever it ships with is what it's going to be forever. We got to get it right on.
All right, next one. Add mechanism for circular references when serializing when serializing.
So I'm going to let David drive this one. He was interested in implementing this. Effectively, the gist of it is we don't have the capability to do reference loop handling and reference reservations yet, and JSON has it, and customers with like first party customers like EF and etc. and Blazor require this feature, and people have asked for it quite a bit.
Okay, so basically, well, I think as on sum it up, one of the last things that Steve added is that we should check that the property list that is getting from the reflection is not deterministic. So that way we should probably skip the ignore option because not always will give the same result. I don't know. We should check that to consider that in order to remove that option or not.
So what's the API proposal?
Oh yeah.
Oh, can you scroll down?
Comes. Give it time.
It might be useful to explain just the sample that you've shown up front and then explain the API.
Oh, sure. Okay, then go back to sorry.
Was it this one here? Or?
That's cool.
Okay, so basically, if you have two objects and you have a reference to, at some point the reference goes back to the first object, it would create a loop. Right now, we are just checking against max depth. Once we reach that, the serializer throws. And what we're trying to achieve now is to add like some sort of mechanism to validate up front in order to check for the reference loop handling. So you don't have to rely on the max depth. You just have to rely on the things that you already have seen on the object graph.
So, yeah, okay.
Well, the current behavior is growing, right?
Yes.
So
Well, the current
this-
behavior is a Stack Overflow. Right?
No, it's
No,
No, okay,
because
okay.
we have a max depth.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
But is it preferable? I mean, like to have thrown by default?
Yeah.
Because, like-
Yes.
Yes. That's
Why?
You don't want to interpret on deserialization by default anything that goes against the JSON specification, including circular references, because what happens is we've seen cases where somebody will send an object graph with cycles to a server. The server will successfully deserialize it. One of the properties might be bad, an exception will get thrown. Inside of the exception handling logic, they try to write the object to a log, generally involves a call to .toString. .toString now stack dives, and you crash the process.
And also, there is no like a correct default behavior because I checked many other serializers and languages, and for example, Stringify does not even handle this kind of stuff. It just throws, and any other languages, for example, one of the libraries from Java, yes, that you should just pass a property to ignore the to pass an attribute to ignore the property, so you can also avoid the serialization of that specific property. What we are trying to achieve with ignore is just serialize it once, and once it's after the first time you serialize that reference or that object, you will ignore for the references to it.
So,
You have an example below.
yeah.
Can you scroll down?
Yeah, I would say for the exception message, we should add more information right now
Yeah.
about like if somebody gets this exception, we tell them like you have another option that if you want.
Oh, right. Yeah. So this is the point of before you have an option, you can't make the system message better.
Right.
Now
Yeah,
that you can
yeah,
add it.
yeah. Now we have.
Yes, for sure.
Yes.
So I assume so you said under ignore that it's the first time that you see. In the case of something like this, had the the list of people. You have a list of people, and you have both Angela, and Bob. But Angela referenced Bob. Bob's now not going to show up in the outer array because if you do a depth first, you would have seen him as Angela's subordinate instead of as an individual person.
Not exactly. I mean,
What was our reference? I think that's what you
No, that's when
No,
you say
this is
preserve
preserve.
reference.
yeah, that's another option.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so-
if you see above, wasn't above the one for ignore?
So what you're saying is that if you have
So you serialized right now Angela.
Yep.
What if you serialized a list of Angela and Bob?
oh, you will get Angela above the beginning because they're on the different stacks, right? Because you start with Angela and then you go all the way deep, and then you find Bob, and Bob refers to Angela and there stops, and it goes
So
back
this is
and goes to the next element to the list and it starts writing Bob.
So the references are so it only stops you from going to your parent. It's not a global reference for the whole serial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just on the parent. I mean, the other option, the preserve, is just for the global, for the entire payload. I mean, for the entire.
And I'm just trying to see if we're making a thing that anyone can read. Because as the JSON spec would say, none of this makes any sense.
Yeah, like this is
Yeah,
clearly
like-
invalid
yeah.
JSON.
Like this is, you are deep off the rails if you're trying to write this down.
Yeah.
People is
Are
asking
there
for.
any key scenarios that this enables that are common with people?
Yeah, so that's I had brought up initially around this feature request coming from a bunch of both first party and third party customers, entity framework, anyone working with databases, Blazor. So if you had an employee and manager object, or if you had a customer order object, then people want this either both reference ignore and reference preserving. So it's like one of the most highly requested feature that we ended up not shipping. It's like 26 thumbs up. So yeah, short answer is yes.
I mean, I understand the people who want reference preserve. Are there actually people who've asked for ignore?
Yeah, that's the whole reference loop. I don't want you to throw. I want you to be able to just
I'm just like, I understand preserve. Preserve is I have a complex graph. Make the graph rematerialize on the other side. Ignore seems like a thing that you succeed, but can you reason about the thing that succeeded? Because when you rehydrate it on the other side, you've lost information. So I'm just wondering if that's actually a useful.
people have asked for it, and somebody supports it, and that's the issue. The reference loop in ignore is what I'm talking about. That has 26 thumbs up.
So how is it different from just suppressing properties?
Or it would walk through the property if it wasn't going to be.
Can you explain what you mean?
So take the employee example, right? Why would you not just say the reports to property is marked as non-serial?
Because you want to serialize reports to for all the other employees, just not the manager, because manager doesn't have his own manager.
I mean,
Are you sure?
As
because
example, no, I
the
mean,
moment because
you can come up with a scenario. I mean,
because like in this scenario, what you really would is you would want to not serialize reports to or manager or whatever. Because the moment that you start serializing, you serialize me, and now you get Dan, and so now you get Steve, and now you're serializing me. Why is Satya in this graph? Like that doesn't make any sense. So that's a place where you don't want to walk up. You may want to have your object know how to walk up, but you don't want your wire format to.
Yeah, it seems to me like if you make because so the difference between the two is that as far as I understand, ignore is basically a function of what your data is versus the one that I propose is basically just a function of your schema, right? Your schema is fixed. You can reason about the schema. You just never get reports to versus you get reports to it only in the first guy because the second guy will just no longer have it. Like how do you reason about data like that?
Well, another value about ignored versus preserve is that on ignore you're not getting all the schema properties attached to the serialization. You are just having what?
Yeah, you're losing data.
Well, yeah, you're losing data, but you don't have the metadata properties. Probably you don't want them.
Because again, so I understand. I understand the reference graph stuff here, but ignore. Like I think Emo and I are saying the same thing. Of like you had a thing, and now you send it somewhere, and it either has all the data you wanted, or because there was a cycle, it's abruptly cut off, and now you don't know what you have on the other side. So that's why I was really asking, do the people who want ignore understand they want ignore, or do they want to not have an exception? Because maybe what they want is preserve.
The problem with preserve, as David was mentioning, is that it introduces metadata into your JSON payload,
Right.
and that has side effects that people may not want.
Right.
And
But ignore also has side effects people may not.
Right, but the point is,
Well,
So I'm a little confused at the actual scenario, because if you're trying to preserve the entire object graph, and you're trying to do it over JSON, which is a payload format that clearly cannot support it, why do people not want metadata as part of the payload?
Metadata is what? Like
$ID, $ref. Like you're asking someone to serialize something in a payload format that clearly is not spec'd to be able to do it.
so the only scenario
So
that I
something
can
has
think
to
of
go.
is something like, you basically have a payload that you deserialize that somebody else controls,
Yes.
right? And then on your end, when you actually define your classes, you actually have back pointers or other things that make your life easier, right? But when
Yes.
you serialize it back out, that will not work because now you have cycles, right? But I think the way you deal with this is you just mark those back pointers that you added to the schema as I don't want to serialize them because they're not part of the
Yes.
payload.
Correct.
And I think that would be the thing. So the only case where I can think of,
You should be sending
ignore-
IDs, not employees at that point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think, either that or just you just don't serialize it at all, right? And I think the only case where ignore would make sense is if I do what we said we shouldn't do, which is you serialize the schema that you don't actually control and you try to butcher it to submission, right? In which case you just make it work by saying, oh yeah, give me this half-ass payload. But I don't know how you would reason about the end result when the first employee actually has the whole manager chain, including Satya, and the second report no longer has any of them. Like it seems like you can never deserialize this into something.
It also seems weird that people would not want extra metadata to be added to their data, but would be okay with us removing data from their.
Yeah.
Like if they care about data preservation, they would probably want extra metadata.
Yeah, I think people that would want this ID values thing is people that basically control the schema on clients rather than just want to use JSON for whatever reason. And they basically use it as a glorified serialization technology, right? Versus the other one is more like, well, there's a service, the service has the schema, so I just have to make that schema work no matter what. But yeah, ignore seems.
Yeah, I'd like to
well
really
defined.
see a strong use case for ignore, because I think that it's just.
Are we okay with the rest though? So let's say we remove the ignore one. Are we okay with the way ID and values work?
Can you scroll up to the? Oh, I see.
Is that a standard
Sorry, where do you want to
format, or
scroll
is this just
To the
de facto
API.
from JSON.NET?
There is no standard for reference graphs through JSON.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no
I
concept
think
of
my only
cycles.
comment would be the reference handling. I could easily see it meaning, okay, there's only ever one reference to this object. It doesn't really call out that it's a circular reference issue.
It's not necessarily circles.
Yeah.
Like you could have, if you have an array that has the same thing in it twice, right? Like if it's referenced the same object, then with reference preservation, you would want it to say the second thing was reference equal to the first thing. With don't preserve references, it would let them both out as unique objects.
During deserialization, what happens if an object has both a $ref field and another field as part of the same object?
During deserialization?
Deserialization, yes.
Well, on JSON.NET, there are some people. I found an Stack Overflow issue that the guy was asking for something to disable this thing when when this deserializing, and also there is another thing that you can. If, for example, if your ID is not on the same or on the beginning of the object, you also have an option for read ahead. So you first read all the metadata and then you deserialize.
Can you clarify your question?
Scroll down, Emo, can you scroll down so that the example output is shown on the screen? This one, yeah. So you see where it says manager, open brace, $ref:1. What if I put at the end of that, comma, name, Charlie? Like, what's the behavior of the deserializer in cases like this?
So you're adding a comma, property name.
Yeah, inside that object.
But with the name with the dollar sign, you mean?
No, so it says manager.
Regular.
So the manager object
Oh,
here in the middle of the screen. Yeah,
It will
dollar
be-
sign.
I suppose it will be lost,
Name.
the property.
So dollar sign ref wins over every other field.
Yeah. Actually, sorry. For JSON.NET, it throws if a reference object, which is the ones that has the ref, has another property else. I mean, it can only have the ref property. So if it finds something else to the ref
Yeah.
property, it will throw.
So if I declare dollar sign ref twice, it will also throw.
Probably.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
the reason I'm bringing this up in API review is because we should also be considering behaviors
Yeah.
during API review, and the deserializer behavior has to be really well defined when it sees something like this.
Yeah.
And
I would-
you definitely need to opt into it.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely has to be opt-in, like unquestionably.
Deserialize should not auto-detect.
Yeah.
You have
Oh,
to
yeah,
change
yeah,
the
yeah.
mode.
It is a gigantic security hole to have this on my
Yeah,
field.
yeah. So we're not talking about any default behavior changes. Both on serialized, deserialized.
Fair
It's all
enough,
about-
but,
yeah.
but like I was looking, so it's JSON serializer options, reference handling.
So you're
preserves,
asking
but
that you need to we will also need to add up an option to opt in for this on this
deserialize.
analysis.
Yes,
Yeah.
deserialize
Well, actually,
cannot do this by odds by
Yeah.
default. You have to say that you want.
JSON.NET does it by
I don't
default.
That is, yeah. I have hot takes on that too.
James does not have security people reviewing the code that he.
But I would agree with that all of this behavior should be opt-in both on
Yeah.
serialized and deserialized.
Right.
The reason something like this can't be opt-in by default is because say that you modify Angela to say Angela's manager is Angela, so Angela manager ref 1. Now the problem is you submit that to the server tries displaying the organizational hierarchy of Angela. The server now gets a Stack Overflow exception and the process dies. Like, we can't have stuff like this on by default.
So what happens if we try to deserialize as a JSON like this, but the deserialize method is not opted into the option?
Presumably $ref and $ID just go
It's
into
just
some
like
overflow.
It'll be wherever
property
the
tag.
whatever you handled for the properties or values from the payload that don't map to properties on your type.
Yeah.
So if you didn't put an overflow bucket, it just drops it. If you did put an overflow bucket, it says, I don't know, there's this thing called $ID here.
So
It's just a field.
during the deserialization, if you got reference numbers that it's not deserialized yet, does that deserialization handle it? I mean, able to handle this? I mean, like, you have reference 100, which is not deserialized yet.
Oh, I
when,
see.
when you hit the reference,
That's why the option read ahead exists, to first check what reference do you have. So you mean, for example, if you have on a list reference to ID2, reference to reference to ID2, and then you have the ID1, and now within the ID1 you are defining the ID2, but you are reading first the ID. Yeah, that thing's handled by the read ahead property, but that we didn't want to add that option because no one is asking for it.
so
And then
I would say
The other,
this-
yeah. So then the other question, even if you had read ahead, what happens if you say I am reference 100 and there is no reference
Oh, I see.
100?
yeah, you will throw at that time. Because you will look ahead, you don't find any reference.
Yeah, so we decided to scope the problem down to not include read ahead until someone especially asks for it.
So I think on this one,
I would say that everybody using this is going to use look over.
yeah, I think this needs like a feature spec
Yeah.
before any code.
Yeah, definitely spec it.
Like need a spec, need to talk about every kind of error, every kind of thing you can see, and then it can come. But I think that ignore is kind of dumb. I don't think anybody likes ignore. But this needs a lot of thought. And
So you said-
copy James is not thought.
You said that like a bunch of like this one had a bunch of thumbs up. Were there like a lot of specific requests only for ignore, or was it just we need to handle security?
Well, the person who asked for it, asked for ignore, and that's got thumbs up. But the scenarios I know of are mainly around preserve.
Yeah, that matches.
But again, I don't. Yeah. The problem is even for APIs of .NET, like for gathering data, I don't know which enum values used most often. I mean, we could certainly come up with a scenario of manage an employee or customer order where you want ignore, but I don't know how real that scenario is.
And presumably, whatever is decided here should also take part into the writable, right? Because you could have cycles in there as well. So whatever the serializer does for cycles, probably bring in the.
Does the writable DOM allow you to put entire objects into it, or just primitives?
So you can say JSON object, my object, and then add a property that has like
Itself.
Yeah, you can add it to itself.
You
And
can
we
add a
have
dictionary to a dictionary.
JSON is
Yeah, you can then do to JSON string.
So it would
Break yourself.
it would impact
So-
the
That's why
the
whatever
options for
whatever
right
we
to-
do here, we should do the same. We should
Oh, yeah.
think about doing the same thing in writable DOM.
Maybe, or the answer is, if you want this, you don't call JSON node.write to, you call JSON serializer with their references.
Yeah.
I think we need to understand the use cases also.
Right.
Primarily, I would expect this to come up when you're just serializing a random object graph, and it may be far less frequent when you're using the DOM. Because with the DOM, you actually have to kind of think about what you're putting into it, right?
But I mean, I guess this would affect DOM parse. It may mean that we reference cycle
True.
or reference rehydrator on DOM parse. Or again, that it's
Oh god.
yeah. So this is way more complicated than an API.
Yeah, so like what are we doing with the issue then?
So the issue needs to go back for
API needs spec.
yeah
Great, we don't have that.
requires work, I guess.
Okay, I guess that means we'll do a pioneer
But
work.
the pushback I would have is like spec aside, that's semantics and behavior. At what point do we change the API itself?
I think before you can say that you actually know what the API that you want to look like is, you need to have the spec that defines what behaviors you want. So I think that there's a cycle right now. We have a spec. From the spec, we've said there are a lot of weird behaviors we'd like to know. We want them written down, and then we can talk about the API again.
I mean, you can't just really separate API from implementation all the time, right? Like there's implied behavior and there's implied support contracts that come from what API service you promise.
Because once you start talking about what are all the fail modes, unbound references, references with additional properties defined, forward look ahead, like all these may influence the feature totality API, and then you can cut features once you've defined what the whole thing should look like. But if we start with just a simple thing, then it may end up worse over time.
Yeah, I think it's the opposite problem with doing language design, right? You can't have the syntax before you have the behavior, right? Like I think once we have the behavior, the syntax should be easy, aka the API should be relatively straightforward. But we're not really unblocking anybody by approving an API when we don't know what the behavior is.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It doesn't stop anybody from prototyping it.
Yeah.
And it's not a no. It's just a
Yeah.
things need to take place beforehand.
Yep.
That's all.
All right.
One thing I would want to get clarity on is there's a question around ignore, or do we need it? Whether or not people are using it for scenario where they're passing data that has cycles on the wire and they don't expect it, is just how one group of people use this JSON stack. If use of JSON has this usage and people are using it a lot and they're requesting for it, how do we say no? You need to come with a concrete scenario. How do we,
Because the question is, can you explain to me when I want it, when it makes sense, and why I would use it? Because if not, you can't write documentation and a sample other than here's a convoluted thing we came up with. So without actually understanding why we're adding something, we shouldn't add it. So that's why I don't care who has the concrete request, but like I want a very specific, this is why this makes sense.
Yeah.
Because everything I can think of is this is data loss that you can't you can't reason.
and the fact that people in the wild are using it and they don't mind the data loss is not evidence enough to suggest that we should add it.
Again,
Because
just
they are
because a bad
successful-
feature exists somewhere doesn't mean we should copy it. Like, I would like to understand the value of the feature and the value that people get out of it before we want to start talking about adding it.
I mean, I don't think we have a goal to make porting from JSON.NET to System.Text.Json viable for everybody, right? Like the goal is that we have scenario parity, but we will not have necessarily identical behavior in all cases either, right? So I think the question is, if an existing implementation has what we consider ill-defined behavior, then you can't really match that anyways. Even if we add ignore, are we now signing up to have the exact same corner case behavior that JSON.NET has? I would say no, but I think that is almost impossible if the problem is,
Yeah.
well, you just randomly drop some stuff on the floor in order to make it fit a certain footprint, right? And then it becomes, well, what was the order in which JSON.NET traversed the object graph? Maybe we traversed it the other way, right? And all of a sudden we make different decisions where we lost the data, right? And now people complain again.
Depth first versus breadth first would completely change what your output looks like.
Yeah.
So essentially ignore paints us into a corner and we can't ever change anything. Reference, if you do read ahead with breadth first search, then it works. So, and then ideally on this one, can we find, Corey's question, can we find anyone other than James who's done this? And is there anything that looks like a standard?
We looked at that. There
that's
isn't.
forming?
Yeah.
That's a thing that I would like to see in the speclet of that this is the only thing that does this, so it is the de facto standard. As opposed, or if there's 3 different competing standards, because this is the internet, there have to be at least 3. Then I'd like to understand.
Maybe it's 2.5. One is half baked.
Oh, well, they're all half.
So it's actually 6.
Yeah, so I mean, then the question becomes, I mean, we can, once we have the design, if there's only 2 modes, then we can have the discussion whether it's an enum, so we can at least add ignore later on if we really wanted to. And I think that would be fine, but I think somebody would have to define what that actually means in a way that is well defined and not randomly dropping data on the floor.
Or if it's just a Boolean, use object references.
At that point, you kind of corner yourself, though. Like, it's a bit of a weirdness. All right, so then we have 30 minutes left, so we can still look at something.
Just one last thing. David, do you have any other questions that you want to ask for clarity, or are you unblocked on what to do?
Well, I'm not very familiar with what you guys mean by a feature spec, but
we've never written one.
No, so basically, what are the scenarios that you want to enable here? Like, how do you envision the usage being? What kinds of outputs do you expect on the wire? During deserialization, if you see this input, what do you expect the object graph to look like? If you see this input, what do you expect the object graph to look like? What cases do you want to detect as failure? How do you report failure? Exceptions, null, something like
what's
that.
Every exception, every null case, every
I'll work with you to get something written up. Like, I think basically it boils down to similar to what you have here, some sample code, and then also what, like in the design section, basically what corner cases do you have, and then how do you report errors? Like it's pretty much maybe documents slightly larger than that, but like not by much. It's just more focused on the behavior rather than the API shape.
okay.
It's not actually as bad as we might be making it out.
It's only 65 pages. I mean, it's like at most 2 weekends.
I've written a 65-page doc before. I mean, are you surprised?
No.
Did anybody read it?
Yes, we published it, in fact.
I wrote a 300-page document, and apparently Levi read it.
I did.
300 page.
The
The fuck are you doing?
export, the ECC and documentation.
I proofed that thing. You're welcome.
Great. All right. So I think this one we can skip. I think then.
How about 40558?
Easy, you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
405.
40558. Not 40458. 4055.
I approve this one.
Oh yeah. Yes.
We should merge changes from code here.
No.
Okay. So that'd be easy. Didn't say it's an easy yes. Yeah, so
We already
in
have
cryptography, there's a bunch of things called object identifiers. Mostly they look like a dotted series of numbers. Some of them represent hash algorithms. Inside our code, we have a bunch of switch statements that say switch off this dotted decimal, turn it into hash algorithm name, whatever. Kevin's written that a bunch in his own code, and he asked, why isn't it just public API? And that's a really good question. So it should be. We do have a rich type that represents OIDs called OID, but it's currently in an assembly that depends on this assembly, and it's a terrible type because everyone thinks it's immutable, but it's actually mutable, so I don't like actually using it for anything, so that's why this just...
Yep.
We could also say that it could take read-only span of char over that.
So this is just a converter from OID to string.
It converts a dotted decimal string into a semi-human readable string.
Yeah.
So 1.2.860.8. I don't know. At this point, I need to look it up in a table. Becomes SHA-1.
Yeah.
So
hash algorithm name you can actually pass into other APIs, such as RSA encrypt, for instance.
I see.
So
Yeah.
he started with both the OID and the OID value, and we dropped it because of
Yeah.
forward reference.
Yeah, and OID's just, as Jeremy said, not really a good type. We shouldn't really encourage its use.
Yeah. Or maybe in 5 I'll take breaking changes and do.
Yes.
Why the APIs doesn't take just string or doesn't take OID?
It does. Try from OID takes
No.
a string.
What I mean is like why we need to have a class or struct at all.
So hash algorithm name is a strongly typed string, aka it gives you an accelerator for things that are well defined in the APIs that take.
It's basically an
Otherwise,
enum that is baked by a string.
Yeah.
It's probably the best way
There
to
are
think
there
about
are public static properties on it that literally represent SHA-1, SHA-256, SHA-512, and so
but
on.
there are way too many different ways to represent the concept of doing SHA-1. So we've said this is the one that we will. So it's essentially pre-published consts.
When would try from OID return false?
If the OID is not known.
Yeah, if we
Okay,
if
so
we
it's a
just
list of well-known strings.
Like if you
You
pass
map to-
in a thing that's not an OID, it'll return false. If you pass in the OID representing RSA, it'll return false because that's not a hash algorithm.
Mhm.
So the case where it will return true is the 6 things that we know about.
Okay.
The case where it will return false is every other case.
it. Sorry, you said earlier like hash algorithm is in a different name than so hash algorithm name is in a different assembly than OID.
Yes.
Then the type named OID, yes.
So what would happen then if we add OID to the API service of hash algorithm name?
So that's why that's not part of the proposal. You
You'd-
scroll down to a discussion instead of the proposal. Proposal's at the top. Just
You'd have to
Oh, I see.
type forward OID to a different assembly or something like that.
I see.
Which,
and since
whatever.
the thing that you would pass here is OID.value, the hint is it's called OID value.
Yeah.
And any reason we wouldn't expose the APIs on OID to basically get a hash algorithm name out of it?
Because from OID it could be a hash algorithm. I mean, like
An OID's basically a GUID.
Yeah.
Think of it like a GUID.
Yeah.
Like it can represent literally anything in the world. So hanging everything off of OID would pollute the OID type if we went
plus
that way.
why if you have the string, which is what most people are going to have anyway, why would you hydrate the OID object and then ask it what kind of? Like very few people actually have OID objects.
Yeah.
Because they're terrible.
But you have the string value that represents the OID, is that what you're saying?
Because you probably read it from config or something like that, or assert.
Yeah. So this is just taking a thing that we have in probably 14 different places because we haven't made a common include for it, and then we'll just put it as public.
Should the parameter name be name instead of value for hash algorithm name? Or try from OID?
Generally, the result of a try from is called value, generally,
I see.
or a try get, try create.
Yeah, but right now we have OID value and value.
Yeah, I mean, we could out hash algorithm name, whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, the constructor for hash algorithm name takes a name, and then
Yeah.
it also has a name property, so that's why I was suggesting name.
I mean name value to me it's all the same. Okay. I would just try to be consistent with the rest of what we have.
Yeah,
Um,
you're right though. Like it is probably a bit confusing, but it does match the pattern.
Yeah, makes sense.
What do we
We call
refer to
it result
OIDs usually?
value.
OID value? We don't say just OID.
Frequently, I say OID because in OID, so the system security cryptography OID type allows you to work both from the OID numeric dotted decimal value, which is the thing that everybody really talks about, and then it also lets you use the Windows friendly name that's associated with it. And so in all the APIs that I've ever proposed that take the dotted decimal, we call it OID value. To be very clear, we are not going to try friendly name.
Yeah, so
We
these
accept
are
dotted decimal.
different functional views, basically.
But then should the API be called from OID value then, or should it still be called from OID?
From OID, because the canonical industry term for the string pattern a.b.c.da is OID. So
Just we have an OID type that is
the callers of the API will know what to pass in.
any account.
All right. I think we spent enough
Kevin,
time
this
on
person?
crypto.
Yeah.
Kevin Jones, yes. we know.
Can't you tell V for Kevin?
No, I know. I've seen him before.
I make jokes about it because he's VCS, right? Version control software, right? He's the Indiana Jones of version control system. Anyway, so we have 4 minutes.
It only took 9 minutes. That's fast enough.
I don't know. This is a
Has this one even like reached consensus?
Well, it's marked ready for review. Somebody clearly mapped it as API ready for review.
Doesn't this API already exist? Hanging off of iDictionary.
it does. This issue is primarily about discoverability, exposing it. I see this question pop up on Stack Overflow with some frequency.
Okay.
I collected a bit of searches. I searched, and those were the results on the first page of Stack Overflow, but there were plenty more. So, primarily, yeah, the benefit is discoverability. There are a couple cons. It's not safe to use. It's easy to misuse, I should say. We have this other method, try update, which is just as easy to misuse. So that one doesn't completely keep me away from it, but
I disagree with you on that, but we can talk about that.
And also the naming. Because we have remove in one case and try update in another, there's really no great way to name this method that I could think of. So but that's a minor thing, I think.
So is the idea to atomically remove a key if it's currently set to a particular value?
Yes.
Exactly.
The biggest questions here also are currently we have a explicitly implemented API for my collection, which remove an value pair, which to me it makes the most sense we approve this API, since we have another try remove which only takes value, I believe, a key, which takes a key. And the if on the naming is confusing because when you have an if, you usually have a predicate that you have also, right? So remove it if the predicate is true for the condition.
Yeah, I agree with Santi. If we want to add this as a public method, I think it should just be an overload of try remove and either take a T key and a T value or take a key value pair of T key, T value.
Right. So the T key and T value means that we would then have an overload which varies on ref, which violates guidelines. But if we add the out of what the existing value was, then that would solve that. It's try remove and try remove with an extra parameter.
Yes.
But that's
What is it?
solve,
What is it
right?
violated? What is it violated about guidelines?
We have a guideline that specifically says do not overload where the only difference between two methods is one is ref and one is not.
It's not ref. It's out.
It's ref.
It says out.
Yeah, I mean, I think key value pair is a good way to disambiguate it. The only kind of oddity there is that try update does not take a key value pair. So it's not quite symmetrical, but
I don't think that's again. I don't think the similarity with try update is there. Try update, you're specifically passing in the key, the new key, and the old key, and in fact, the ordering mirrors compare exchange. So there's not even the opportunity for them to be.
try update. You say assign this new value if the existing value is this.
Yes, you don't
So
say
it's
assign.
essentially the same operation.
It's not though. I mean, you're not saying replace this key value pair with this value. You're saying replace this value with this value.
I don't know. It's I could see your perspective. It just doesn't seem like glean from having two APIs that are so similar? I'll give you that they're not identical, but they're similar enough that having key value pair on one and not on the other just seems kind of strange.
The reason
From my perspective, you can't use them in the same scenarios. They are for different purposes. One of them is removing something, a key value pair in its entirety. One of them is replacing a value. There's no reason for, like, if you were to define try update with a key value pair, it would look, I don't even know what it would look like. I guess it would take two key value pairs where the key in both had to be identical.
I agree with Steve on that. Where the key value pair, you're saying remove this key value pair, and when you iterate on items on the dictionary, you usually get a key value pair saying this is the key for this value.
Yeah.
And when you are updating, you're saying on this key put this new value. You're not saying update this whole key value pair. You're just updating the value.
Yeah, but logically, I think I'm with Corey more in the sense that what you do really is you give a key and a comparison value, right? So basically, what you're talking about is a versioned key, right? You say, update this key that currently has this value, and you either remove that entry or you add it or you set it to a new value, right? It's basically a form of a versioned key, really.
But try update.
What operation are you talking about?
Well, both. Like, try update basically says, here's the key, here's a comparison value, which happens to be the third argument, and here's the new value, which basically says, set this key to this new value if it currently has the other value, right? So basically, you're identifying the keys. Basically, it's kind of a versioned key, right? Because you basically use the value as the version that it currently has. And so in that sense, remove and update are the same operation, and from the point of view that you're identifying the key via the same mechanism, right? Via its key and its current value. And that's the thing where the similarity is.
You're not, though.
What do you mean you're not?
I mean, you're basically, in the case of update, you're basically saying, find this key.
Yep.
If it doesn't exist, you don't pay attention to the values. If it does exist, right,
Yep.
the key is sitting there, it has a slot associated with it. We're now no longer going to touch the key. We're now just looking at the value slot.
Yep.
And then we say, does this value, nothing to do with the key anymore, does it match this other value? If yes, place it. If no, don't. With try remove, you're saying, find this pair in the dictionary and remove it if it exists.
So essentially, with try remove, you're also operating on the key itself, not just the value.
Right.
But when finding the key value pair, you're still taking them together. I see that as the same as try update. Right? You have key matches and then value matches, and then you do some operation on it, whether it's update or remove.
But with update, you're not replacing the key.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And in try add, we don't take a key value pair, even though we're inserting a key, right? Currently, we have a lot of key value pair methods, but they're all kind of explicitly implemented interfaces. There's nothing on the, public surface of concurrent dictionary.
For what it's worth, Steve, the actual guidance is do not use ref or out modifiers to overload members.
Read that.
Christoph.
That's not here.
So
I don't even think C# lets you on.
there was part of the proposal that said, what if you used a predicate instead of passing in the value?
That was me,
That-
and then Steve
yeah.
said that's bad because you have to do it inside the lock. And don't do
Yeah,
things
so
inside the lock.
there's
Yeah.
some subtlety here. We're always going to be executing some potentially user-supplied code inside the lock.
Yes.
If it's a delegate, it's the delegate. But without a delegate, there is whatever the implicit comparer is. Whatever equality compare of t.default gives you back. And so you're still potentially executing arbitrary code. The difference is, in one case, it's very explicitly arbitrary code passed at the call site that could reference the dictionary itself by closure.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the case of the built-in iCompare, there's almost no chance that the I-equatable implementation on the type reference to that specific dictionary instance.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that like the reasonable, like given that it could be using any arbitrary comparison, and the existing try remove tells you this is what I found for this key, I think it makes sense to just say that this is try remove to key to value comparison out to value existing value. And now we don't have what's the like you can explain why the overload's different. We don't need the suffix because we're not overloading on a reduced signature, and we don't need the key value pair.
Sorry, I didn't understand what signature you were proposing.
So you're also outing the old
to key to value, out to value.
Out to value is what it currently contains.
What was there that we removed?
But it will essentially
it will
the
be
same
equal.
of what you passed in.
That
right?
depends on what equality comparer you gave the concurrent dictionary.
The same could be said for key as well.
It's equality comparer of t value dot default in all cases because it's t value, not t key.
Oh, right. So it'll just be reference or value on the key. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind. So it's, I guess, so what it would be is the key to value out to key. This is the key that matched.
I don't think you would need that because the input argument should be sufficient.
Okay.
The only thing I could imagine that you would need an out t value for is I didn't remove it because here's the t value that was already there in case you
that
needed
would
this
be useful
information,
in this
but
split loop.
yeah.
Fair enough. And now you have that it's an anti-try and that the out is
Yeah,
set
it's-
only if it returns false.
And what if we just use the remove cycle?
I mean, that exists. You just cast it.
But make it
No, but make it
implicit.
What did you just
implicit.
surface? The existing method?
That's the other method is follows the try pattern,
Yeah.
and that's why it has an out parameter. Since this one is not going to have an out parameter, we should be able to use the remove one that returns a bool, which we follow across all the other collections.
Yeah. Because that API
Yeah,
already
I-
exists, so make it implicit.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I agree with you, Santi, on the one hand. On the other hand, we've taken some liberties with try in concurrent dictionary and some of the other concurrent collection types in general. Like concurrent dictionary doesn't expose add; it exposes triad. There's no out parameter there. Now, maybe we've taken too many liberties, but we were trying to drive home the point in the design that can't trust from moment to moment anything about the state, and we wanted to avoid people doing things like if not contains key add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when we were talking about the span and memory guidelines, Christoph pointed out that we should probably take what we currently call the try parse pattern and make it the try pattern. And I think try add actually hits that. It's the I return false instead of throwing a I'm sorry, this already exists. So I think that we found the correct spirit of the try pattern in concurrent dictionary, and that try parse is a subset of the try pattern. So I don't think that we abused it really. I think we found that it needed to have been generalized, and you did.
And so from that perspective, all of the mutating members that are publicly exposed on concurrent dictionary are tries, and it feels like we'd be setting ourselves up for inconsistency that might appear to be meaningful, and if it was interpreted to be meaningful, that would be a problem by having remove instead of try remove.
So what's like? Can we violate the guideline and say try remove takes a key and a t value in addition to an overload that takes a key and an out t value?
So
Those are just guidelines.
I don't think Shishab lets you do that. You can try it.
Well, you can't overload one of them ref and the other one being out.
But you should be able to overload them as
based on ref and non-ref. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those that while C# allows you to understand the call on this, that not necessarily all CL are languages. So
But
I don't
at
know if
that
that makes
point
the
you can
method
cast.
uncallable.
And
Okay, got it.
I agree as well that it's
Yeah.
potentially, I mean, I know I suggested it, but it's also potentially a pit of failure in that you might accidentally use out when you didn't mean to, or not use it when you meant to,
Yeah.
and you will get meaningfully different behavior.
Right. Like they're the same name, but they're not actually. At that point, they're very different.
So try remove key value pair.
The try remove key value pair seems to be the least controversial.
Yeah.
And then it's just a question of, do we actually want it? And I don't have a strong opinion for it. My primary objection to the issue as it was written up was just I've seen too many times the exact pattern that was used to motivate it, and in most of the cases where I saw it, it was fundamentally wrong. And it's one thing if you have to cast to iDictionary to use the functionality, because 99% of the time that you're casting to iDictionary, consumers are then not relying on the concurrent nature of it. And so their own usage of it is not going to be driven by expecting from one call to the next necessarily be consistent. And then there's like the 1% where people actually cast to that in order to get the functionality, and okay, they could be falling into the pit of failure then as well. But it's just not like right in their face. I agree the functionality is certainly important in certain cases. I just want to make sure we're not doing more harm than good. And to be clear, the current example that's shown is fine, where it's, I think Corey updated it to use like an integer that's ref counted, or like a ref count value where the t value is just an int. The previous example that was potentially problematic had the t value being some type that had a count property on it, and the example was basically if dictionary contains, if dictionary.try get value, and the value equals 0, then remove.
Yeah, which is very easy to get wrong.
Which is very easy to get wrong.
That's where I proposed the predicate, and then Steve said nope. So.
All right, so I really have to run because I need to be at 12:30 in another building. So what's the decision? Yes, no? Or should we talk about it more later?
Try remove key value pair.
Well, I think it's if we're adding it, the signatures try to remove key
Yeah.
value pair. The question is, should we add it or not? And I don't know that we have an answer to that one yet. And that's a Steve architect question more than a this room question, I think.
I mean, I would say we should add it. But I don't know. The documentation needs to be like stellar.
Okay.
So if
Should
we
we
wanted to
put
add
the
it,
example in the
Yeah.
doc of like not use it like this?
Do not use this.
Yeah.
Do
I
not
think
follow
the
this
current
pattern.
documentation for the remove method and try update don't even mention it either, so we can probably overhaul all of that.
All right, I have to hang up the call now because I really have to leave.
Having key
If
key
we-
value